Hey guys, so welcome back. We now arrived. In the meantime, we arrived in the kitchen because it's too cold to make videos outside this time of the year. Hope that's okay for everyone. I miss the outdoors too. Linus is taking a nap, so we will be. I realized that it would probably be helpful to draw a couple of things out for you, so we will use this kitchen table and some paper and some Sharpies to get ideas across to you. I have to confess that I'm actually trying to sort of sort through a lot of stuff myself, so regard this as a sort of like a common thought, like a thought experiment that we conduct together. So I don't want you to think that I think of myself as some kind of teacher or guru, which obviously I'm not. I'm just a human being trying to understand what's happening for various reasons. And and in the process, I hope to interest you in quantum physics, maybe a little bit, or, psychology, neuroscience, and all that kind of stuff, which I personally find really interesting. So anyways, let's segue to the first part of this series. Hey guys, so let's try this and see how this will work for us. So I'm gonna basically just let information sort of flow. Whatever wants to be put on this piece of paper. It's all in my head, or I should say my head is sort of like the radio station, and I'm trying to pick up the information and sort of lay it out here so it makes sense. It's basically wrapping up a lot of things that we've already talked about in our previous two series. So since we said in the beginning, or I said in the beginning, how I don't want this to be roses and rainbows and unicorns and angels and demons and whatever, but I want this to be more coming from a scientific angle. So we will just leave all these terms, that might be associated with religion and what you would probably call spirituality. Let's just put that to the side for a moment, and let's look at this from a scientific perspective. So we should probably start with the brain. And forgive me if I'm going to be really sort of just sketching this out here. So that's supposed to be a brain. Hope you can see it. And I think what we all sort of know, or what we all sort of learn from school, is that we are moving, as human beings, we are moving in a space that has 3 dimensions, right? So you have the x-axis, you have the y, and you have the z. So that's 3 dimensions. But then there's also something that we call time. So +1 equals 4 dimensions. And if we were to sort of try to put the brain in that space of 4 dimensions, and obviously we're limited because we only have 2 dimensions here on this piece of paper, then I would probably draw it something like, a half circle. So in this area, So in this, inside this area is the space of 4D, right? So space plus time equals 4D, 4 dimensions. And of course, in time, or how we perceive time, we have a point that we would probably call the now, which is t0. And then we have something we would call the future, which is t plus 1. And we also have something that we call past, which would be t minus 1, right? So when we have to, so there's basically, and then there's two sort of ways to look at time. So one is obviously in a three-dimensional space, when you want to move an object like a macro object from point A to point B, that requires time, right? So that's not the kind of time I want to be talking about. The time I want to be talking about is the time that we seem to construct or the time that's sort of related to what's happening inside our heads with our brains. So when your brain perceives anything, like any sensory perception, let's say, I don't know, you see something, right? Then there's an input. Not sure how I should draw that. So let's say it's a circle, right? So there's some kind of input, and you make a perception. So let's say that is your perception. Now, when you perceive, your brain has a tendency to produce memories, right? So, I mean, not everything gets, well, I should say, well, probably, I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to emulate neuroscience here, but so what we could say is you make a perception, and in that space from t0 to t minus 1, perceptions get stored as memories. So make one perception, one memory gets stored. Make another perception, another memory gets stored. Now let's introduce positive and negative perceptions. So make one positive perception, memory gets stored as positive. Make one negative perception, memory gets stored as negative. Make another positive one, memory gets stored as positive. Make another negative one, maybe memory gets stored as negative. So this is what happened, you know, on a very, I mean, just, this is what's happening, okay? Now, when you perceive, not only do you perceive and things get stored in your memory, but what also happens is, I'd say from about, I'm not a developmental psychologist, but somewhere in between years 1 and 3, you develop what's called a consciousness of self. So like this I consciousness we keep talking about. So as you perceive, with every perception, you perceive the perceiver, which you think is I, right? So you have a perception, and with time you start thinking, well, who's perceiving? Well, I must be, like this, whatever in this brain or in this body. So I. And as you keep perceiving, I, you start to perceive you start to also perceive you, right? So there's always this perception of I versus you. And at the same time, you keep having perceptions, you keep storing things, and then since you not only live in the past, so to speak, like in this, you can live entirely in the past if you want to, but we also have a tendency to sort of to anticipate things. So not only do you produce memories, but you also make anticipations, right? So we could probably make little boxes over here too and say, well, that's my anticipation number 1, and that's my anticipation number 2, and my anticipation number 3. And it seems obvious that whatever you anticipate is strongly biased by whatever you've perceived in the past, right? So if whatever you've been perceiving in the past has been mostly negative, then chances are what you are going to anticipate in the future is also going to be negative. So whatever you perceive or experience back here in perceived past, will greatly influence how you can anticipate future. And we could probably cut this short and say, okay, well, so from a brain's perspective, whatever's on this side is connected with past. So it's connected with memories and whatever is connected with this side, which is t to t1 to t plus 1 in future or perceived future, is anticipation. Now, we also talk, when we talk in human terms, when we think of our future, then we probably have hopes. We have dreams. But we probably also have fears if past experiences have been mostly negative. Then we are probably prone to have more fears than dreams or hope. And the same thing is with our memories. They can be, if we think of positive memories, then we would probably talk about nostalgia. If we talk about negative memories, we would probably talk about things like trauma, like traumatic experiences or pain and all that. Now you see, if you take this eye as an example, and I mean your eye, then just try and situate yourself in this space right here that we came up with so far, and say, okay, where do you think do you spend the most time? Do you spend the most time, thinking of memories of what happened in the past? Are you mostly nostalgic? Do you think of, or do you identify a lot with what happened in the past, with maybe a trauma or with pain? Or do you mostly anticipate the future? Are you prone to spend a lot of your time thinking about things that will be happening, that are not happening yet, and that you have hope about, dreams, or that you fear? Whatever you do, you probably are not spending a lot of time here, which is in T0, which we could also call the now. And that is one observation that is worthwhile making, and we should probably take it from here now. So what I suggested in my earlier videos is that modern physics suggests that there is much more than these 4 dimensions. So, and it's not only that modern physics suggests that, but that, you know, traditions of all times have sort of suggested that, and those were obviously linked to some kind of spirituality or religion, which we don't want to be touching. But so you can also come from this whole science side and say, okay, well, nowadays, you know, we do have science, we do have quantum physics, for example, we do have quantum theory and quantum field theory and all that kind of stuff, and I will probably link some of these in the description box of this video just to show you that, you know, there's actual science behind this stuff, and it comes from places like Stanford University, you know, so it's good sources, it's validated sources. So, and of course we are very limited in this sort of 2-dimensional space right here. So whatever I'll be drawing is of course an abstraction. I mean, I can't possibly come close to like a real description of what I'm talking about. But nevertheless, so we concluded that, well, first of all, that's what we should be taking away, is that as we have perceptions, this thing happens. We think of an eye that has perceptions, and that's very human, very natural. So we all have eyes, I think, eye consciousnesses. And that brings us to making a difference between I and you. So that's also very important. And all that is based on our making or having perceptions, or on our ability to have perceptions. It's like a side product. So this is a side product of our making perceptions, and that also is a side product of making perceptions. And the other takeaway was that, well, we tend to spend a lot of times either in the past or in the perceived past, that is with, you know, content of our consciousness that has been stored somewhere in our brain as memories, or we spend a lot of time or a lot of perceived time in the future anticipating whatever we are able to anticipate based on the past, or our past, or perceived past. Okay, so let's just say there are way more dimensions than these 4 dimensions we so far covered. Science talks about, depending on what theory you follow, of up to from 10 to 26 dimensions, I think. That's my last information. Now, obviously those are sort of incomprehensible for the human mind, because how are we supposed to think of them? Are we supposed to think of them as spatial dimensions, or is there time in these dimensions, you know, or are these outside what we know as time space? Now, I'm afraid I can't answer this question because I don't have the answer, but if I had to draw it, I would probably draw it like, I would probably draw it outside of the space, outside of the space of time space of these 4 dimensions. Just because I want to show you something later. So let's just go ahead and think of it like this. So let's suppose that somehow at t0 there's a way for these dimensions to meet. And so the next one would be 5D. The one after that would be 6D, 6 dimensions, 7, 8, 9. And I think what's happening is that whatever dimension comes next is sort of like enfolded in the one that comes next. So 5D is sort of like encapsulated in 6D, and 4D therefore would be actually inside 5D, right? That's just a feeling. I'm not a scientist, but it seems to make sense that way. And what? So when we go back to the human. To the human being, which is demonstrated here by just a brain, So the human being that manages to be resting at t0, like not thinking of past content and not anticipating future content, but is fully in the now, seems to be able to access these other dimensions. It's like piercing through to other dimensions. So I think this is like the first portion. This is like the groundwork, or sort of like the basics of what I base everything on, that I'll be talking about. So I want you to understand that first, and then we'll take it from here. I'll make sure that I will link relevant. I'm going to try and sort of put relevant information in terms of the science behind all this in the description box of this video. And yeah, I'll see you in the next episodes, and I think we will call this series The Human Condition. All right, okay, thanks for listening, and see you soon.